Test, test.
It went on.
That's on.
So turn it off now.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to the presentation of articles for the 16th edition of the Rocky Mountain Fur Trade Journal. We have some excellent articles for you. We're going to start out with Jerry Enzler. He's an author, historian, museum director, and past contributor to the Rocky Mountain Fur Trade Journal. He's also the author of the 2021 biography of Jim Bridger, Trailblazer of the American West, which I need to mention is on sale in the bookstore, and also is a finalist for the Western Writers of America Spur Award. Also, the book won a True West Magazine Reader's Choice Award. Now, Jerry's article called Guiding the Pathfinders describes the contributions of a dozen experienced mountain men whose knowledge of the Western landscape and native people made the formal measuring of and mapping of the West possible. In other words, Fremont was the great Pathfinder, and these are the people who showed the great Pathfinder where the path was. I'll turn it over to Jared.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah. That's exactly right. Who were the Pathfinders? Well, the very first Pathfinders were the animals who found. Okay, it's on now. And hopefully it'll stay on. So the animals were the first Pathfinders, obviously. And then the indigenous people, the Indians who lived here, they learned from which way the animals were going, and they perceived that that's where they're going to find water. That's a path. It's better. It's not going to be so steep. You're not going to fall off a cliff because the animals aren't that dumb every day. And then came the mountain men, and they became the Pathfinders. And then came the topographical engineers and people like John C. Fremont, who ran for office as the Pathfinder. I don't think he actually created the name specifically, but he certainly promoted himself as the Pathfinder. And I'm going to talk about the mountain men and the ones who went beyond just the 1822 to the 1840 period, those who were guides to these expeditions. And there were so many of them that I had to limit this to those who were working on a road, a wagon trail, or a railroad, because there's a whole other category of immigrant guides for immigrants, and another category, mountain men who were guides for the military. And so there's a great long history. So from 1822 to 1840, more than 1,000 mountain men explored and trapped the Rocky Mountain region. They absorbed a vast knowledge of the rivers and the mountains and the passes. And after the last rendezvous, many of them left for the States or they went to Oregon, but some brought their remarkable skills into the service of the nation. What kind of skills? Well, Washington Irving says, the mountaineers scaled the vast mountain chains and pursued their hazardous vocations. They moved from place to place on horseback, hardy, lithe, vigorous, and active. And indeed, they were tried and tested. Guiding the Pathfinders is the title of this. But what I'm going to focus on is the knowledge that the mountain men had and that they told to the leaders of these expeditions. And many times the leader of the expedition discounted. They either felt that the mountaineer was wrong, or they wanted to become also the Pathfinder. After Carson had gotten so much publicity, subsequent leaders of exploration or expeditions, they had this tendency, well, I want to go this way, I want to find something new. There's some vanity in there, and there's obviously a lot of misunderstanding. So let's see. So the first four expeditions are all going to be Carson. And this one is John C. Fremont's first expedition, the Oregon Trail to South Pass. It was 1842. Well, as you know, the Oregon Trail was already emerging at that time, and the wagon trains already knew where to go. But the service that many of these topographical engineers provided is they documented what was already known by the mountain men and by the early travelers on the Oregon Trail. And they published it. And they took scientific notations and they measured the mileage. And so they did make, these engineers, they made significant contributions based on the knowledge of our mountaineers. Now, Fremont was very vain. Carson really didn't need to tell them how to go. They were just following, they could already see the path. Carson's knowledge or value was his knowledge and his ability of how to deal with the brigade that was going through country. For example, on the very second day of Fremont and Carson, they head off from Chateau Landing near Kansas City, what's now Kansas City. And I think his name was Bryant, a soldier, he comes shouting in, Indians, Indians, I saw 27 Indians. And so Carson's there. And so he leaps on the nearest horse, no saddle. He rides off. He comes back and he says, no, the 27 Indians, no, there are actually 6 elk. And so, he knew enough not to panic. and knew enough to go out and explore. One of Fremont's mandates for everyone who was with him, traveling with him, was that he was the only person who could keep a journal or a diary. In other words, he wanted to go down history, his story, not anyone else's story. What he didn't know was that his cartographer, Charles Preuss, was keeping a secret diary. Preuss was a very complaining man, a dour man. In the first 3 pages of his diaries, he says that Fremont is childish, foolish, and a simpleton. And several pages later, he says the Americans traveling with them, they're blockheads. So he was quite biased also. And I think it's funny to look behind the scenes of what's happening here. So one of their first challenges was the fact that there was some danger from the Lakota Indians. They were traveling through Nebraska, what's today's Nebraska, and they hadn't reached Fort Laramie yet. And Fremont had gone off, but Carson and Preuss and some others, they were the main force of the command at that time. And they met Jim Bridger, who was on his way to Fort Laramie. And Bridger told them that this is going to be very serious. And the issue was, in 1 year before, 1841, the Lakota attacked Henry Frabe and killed Frabe and 4 of his men. But at least 10, if not more, of the Lakota were killed. And so the young men of the Lakota group, they really wanted to get some revenge. So they said they're going to kill every American that they see that goes beyond Fort Laramie. French Canadians in the group said, there will be no life for us. They actually, in Fremont, it's written in French, but the translation, there will be no life for us. Carson made his will based on this warning from Bridger. And he said, all of us should never see this fort again. And so they really thought they were going into their death. In fact, Thomas Fitzpatrick had been at Fort Laramie, Fort William was known at the time, and he had already set out to guide Elijah White and Lansford Hastings, taking him from Fort Laramie to Fort Hall. So Fremont didn't exactly know what to do. Bridger was no longer there. Carson wasn't that familiar with the Oregon Trail. So Joseph Bissonnette from the nearby Fort Platte, he agreed to hire them to work with, Fremont agreed to hire Bissonnette. And he took them west to the Red Buttes, which is just west of Casper. And Bissonnette said, this is as far as I go, I'm going back. And my advice to you is you should turn around also. Well, Fremont didn't turn around and they were safe. They were a pretty large enough party. But that was one of the biggest challenges. One more thing about this very first expedition is that Fremont's, he completed his mission, which was very simple, go from Kansas City area to South Pass. But then he decided he would ascend the highest mountain, what he thought would be the highest mountain. And so the group starts going, and it turns out that Kit Carson is walking a little bit faster than Fremont. Fremont's got altitude sickness. And so what happened is Preuss was writing in his book that Carson was going too fast, and Fremont said, stop, come back. And Fremont made Carson stay back with the mules, and he had other men go with him who would not go ahead of him. Fremont wanted to be the very first one to do that. The second expedition, well, I guess I jumped it. This is the Wind River Mountains right here. And I don't know which one he thought was the tallest, but historians have said that what he did think was the highest of the peaks was not actually the highest. So the second expedition was to complete the Oregon Trail, to go from South Pass to the Pacific Ocean. And the primary guide for Fremont for that was Thomas Fitzpatrick. And they set off in 1843. Now, Fremont brought along very proudly a mountain howitzer, which would shoot 12-pound ammunition. But it was so awkward and so heavy, they actually were going slower than families were going in their wagon train. So it was really a foolish thing on his part to do, but he was all about the image, and eventually he had to abandon that. So Fremont rehired Kit Carson to join Fitzpatrick as an additional guide. And then he hired a 21-year-old man named Alexander Godey. So back a little bit, just a very brief thing. Carson went west, I think it was in 1826, and he went to the Southwest House in Santa Fe area. And in 1831, he went up to more the northern Rocky Mountains, and he was very, very successful. Thomas Fitzpatrick his family came to Canada from Cavan County in Ireland, and then came to St. Louis. So in 1823, Thomas Fitzpatrick joined the Ashley Henry expeditions, went up the Missouri in 1823, was part of the Arikara battle. And so he was very well known. So I mentioned a third one that you may not know as well. Carson hired a man named Alexander Godey. Now, Godey was a Missouri Frenchman. The family had actually immigrated from France to Canada, and then they went down to St. Louis, and he started trapping with Kit Carson. So he was a friend of Carson's, and that's how he came along. So they did complete their part to go from South Pass to the Columbia River, or the Columbia River and the Pacific. They were done. Well, they're not done in terms of Fremont. Fremont said, no, we're going to go somewhere else. So instead of returning home, he decided they would cross the Great Basin and then make a perilous midwinter crossing of the Sierra Nevada to California. And we all know that's a very dangerous time to try to cross the Sierra Nevada. It took them across the mountains, a mountain pass, which today is known as Carson's Pass. They were bogged down in the snow. They were unsure of the location, which way to go. The nights were very cold. Their Chinook guide deserted them. The horses were too weak to carry the pack, so the men had to serve as pack animals. And on February 6th, this is a little bit interesting with Carson. On February 6th, they reached a spot. They went and searched for the Sacramento Valley. And far in the distance, through their telescope, they could see a valley which did not have any snow in it. And they realized that that is probably Sacramento Valley, and that if they got to that point, they would be close to Sutter's Fort. Then Carson kept looking, and looking through a telescope, he said this. He says, there is a little mountain. It is 15 years since I saw it, but I'm just as sure as if I had seen it yesterday. And what he was talking about was Mount Diablo. It's south of modern Clayton, California. And Carson had seen it in 1829, 1830, when he was trapping for Ewing Young. So there's this connection between the people during the fur trade era and then how they're carrying that knowledge with these. They finally reached Sutter's Fort. When they set out for this second part of the journey, which was not really authorized, they had 104 horses and mules. By the time they reached Sutter's Fort, only 33 of them were alive. That's how challenging it was. Fremont, and at this time then, they made some, maybe this will go there well, but we'll get to that in a minute. Just before the third expedition, Fremont made a map of his first two expeditions. And he made a lot of significant contributions, but he made a significant error, and it's not shown here. But on his map, he drew Great Salt Lake as being connected to Utah Lake. And then he went on to describe that Great Salt Lake is all full of salt, and Utah Lake is not, it's freshwater. He doesn't quite understand it, but he draws it all as if it's connected. And if he had asked any of the people that he was with, they would have told him, obviously, these are two separate lakes. You know, he could have gotten the message from Carson or Fitzpatrick or Godey or also Joseph Walker. At the end of it, he actually hired Joseph Walker to help out. And those mountaineers, as well as most mountaineers, knew that those were two separate lakes. In fact, I think it was 1826 when William Sublette sent 4 trappers around to circumnavigate and find out that the Salt Lake, was not connected to other lakes. And those 4 trappers, by the way, in 1826 were Henry Frabe and James Kleiman and Louis Vasquez and Moses Black Harris. Okay, this shows the beginning of the third expedition. And this one, believe it or not, turned into more an opportunity to capture land from the Mexicans in Alta California and to try to make those be part of America. But the first thing he did, he wrote to Carson, he said, I need help. And Carson was actually trying to establish a stock ranch. And Carson, quote, said, I sold everything at a sacrifice, farm and cattle. And he not only came himself, but he brought his friend Dick Owens to join him as another guide. So Owens was also one of these mountain men who continued to work after the 1840s in this train. So he did a lot of travel with Carson during the Rendezvous years, and they had a long, long friendship. So, but by August of 1845, Carson had assembled 60 men for his expedition, which is way more than they would need. And he basically almost provoked a war with California. There had already been a war with Mexico in 1846. So there's a lot of challenge and change, and the fourth one is the same. The fourth expedition, I'll cut it short because time's jumping. Basically, he wanted to, oh, well, this is when I want to talk about the meridians. So this is the 41st parallel, and that's a route where you'll find later, like Stansberry and others were going along that route there. There's Fort Bridger here. Here's the 35th parallel, and this is one of those Carson's fourth, or Fremont's fourth one with Carson. And no, not with Carson, but with Williams. And then the 35th parallel was another place. These are all possible locations for a transcontinental railroad. And there were expeditions exploring all of those. This one was a disaster, this fourth expedition. So it was, the guides were Bill Williams, who was a mountaineer who started as a preacher. And then he boasted himself that he was a master trapper. And he was a very colorful man. He was fought in the War of 1812, and he was a figure in the mountaineer time period. Williams and Carson Fremont got into a big fight. Williams said, I wanted to go one way, Fremont wanted to go another way, and here's where our troubles commenced. The result was that 11 men died, 1 of starvation and 10 from freezing, because basically Fremont hadn't listened to Dick Wooten, who he had asked about it, and hadn't listened to old Bill Williams. So these are the challenges that America was facing, actually. And this shows a little bit of Williams Pass there by Pueblo, and they're going this way. They could have gone over Williams Pass, but that was covered. They went through this pass here, and this is where they had their disagreement, Robideau Pass. And so this is where, trying to get out of all this, they went up here, they thought they could go Rio Grande and then the Margarita Hills. And that's where, trying to escape from that, that's where we had 11 men die because of Carson and his impetuousness. This is a picture of Jim Bridger, which is actually, the museum has it on loan, and it's probably taken about 1857. And this is when, and I'm going to be talking about Howard Stansberry and Bridger guiding him in 89 in 1850. But I'm going to refer to this image again later. And you see the pants, they seem to be fairly plain. They're not corduroy or anything. Same with this jacket. The background isn't very clear. And I think it's because there's a later picture here that I'm going to show you and talk about at that time. But just remember this picture here. So in 1849, I'm going to back up one. So Stansberry came out and he asked Bridger to guide him. This is a typical path to Salt Lake City. And he asked Bridger to guide him through this route here, Bear River, and then over towards Ogden. And Bridger was showing him a good, safe way to go. It'll be a challenge to do wagons. Stansberry was really obstinate, though. Stansberry insisted at one point, Bridger told him they should follow a long ridge that ran southwest. Stansberry said, I want a route that's more immediate westing. And so Stansberry insisted, we're not going the way you want, Bridger, we're going this way. And then Stansberry writes, he said, realizing he made a mistake, this choice led to a canyon with sides so steep that it was scarcely passable for mules. A single false step of our mules would have instantly precipitated us. It required no small exertion of nerves to look down from this dizzy height. So a few days later, they reached a broad valley, and Bridger said, if you'd gone the way I said, you would be now coming out of this broad valley instead of climbing this perilous piece. So interesting thing. So when they reached Salt Lake City, Bridger met a man named H.J. Clayton, and he had met him 10 years earlier. And so Clayton says, Bridger was disgusted with his experience with Stansberry, and he severely reproached himself for offering to pilot Uncle Sam's men. And Bridger declared he would never do the like again. Well, Bridger must have fallen in, because the very next year, Stansberry said, well, there's got to be, to get here from Fort William, you got to go north and you got to go south. Isn't there a more direct route? And Bridger said, of course there is. So Ashley had been here somewhere around here in 1825. The Cherokee Trail went this way and this way. Bridger knew it, Vasquez knew it. Bridger showed it to him, and they named it Bridger Pass. And it did cut, I think, about 61 miles initially off the route. and eventually became the Overland Trail and more or less Interstate 80 today. This is what he was doing, what Stansberry was doing. He's doing triangulation at the east end of the baseline. This is at Great Salt Lake. And the first time triangulation had been used by the topographical engineers. And so he did introduce that. So they were providing good contributions. It's just when they ignored the good advice of the mountaineers. So here's another expedition. This is Lieutenant John Gunnison. And he had been with Stansberry, and Bridger was guiding him. And so they're going on the 38th parallel, which you remember we saw the parallels. And their guides were Marcelino Baca and Antoine Leroux. I'll tell you just a little bit about them. I guess I'm on chapter 2. So you may, how many have heard of Marcelino Baca? 1 or 2? All right. So he was born around 1808, and he first trapped in the Taos and Santa Fe region. By 1835, he joined Bridger's brigade in the Northern Rockies. And in fact, you may know in 1837, Carson was with Bridger, so was Meek, and so was Osborne Russell, and 1,500, as many as 1,500 Blackfeet wanted to attack Bridger and his men. Baca was the one who actually climbed up to the bluff of the mesa top and looked to see whether he could see the Blackfeet. And he was actually shot, and he ran down, he leaped 50 feet down the snow and everything. So he was a very hardy and active mountaineer. And so was a man named Joaquin Leroux, and he was also a guide for Gunnison. And he lived in Taos, and he was a native of St. Louis. He actually answered the call for 100 enterprising young men in 1822. And at the age of 19, he joined Henry and Ashley. So he's another significant mountain man you may not have heard of, but here he is not only being a good, excellent person in the fur trade era, but also now in the later period. Gunnison decided, so he had to leave because he was doing another trip with Whipple on the 35th parallel. And so they hired a pioneer named William Motter from Utah, probably a Latter-day Saint. And he told Gunnison not to put his camp where he did. Well, that night, the Pavant Indians attacked, and they killed 8 members of the expedition, including Gunnison. So there's another example of a pioneer, someone who knew what they were doing, and the leader of the expedition ignoring that news. So in 1856, Bridger stops trading Gore, and he's at Fort Union. Here's an image of Fort Union. And he finds that there is Lieutenant G.K. Warren, who's creating one of the most significant maps in American West. And with him is Ferdinand Hayden, who was one of the most significant scientists of our era. In fact, just a year before, or 2 years before, he had discovered the first Jurassic fossils in North America. So it was very significant, and his work was going to the Smithsonian. They got along pretty peacefully, and Bridger was their guide. They just went down from Fort Union, which is the mouth of the Yellowstone flowing into the Missouri. They just went down the Yellowstone and came back up because they had other places to go. This one. What they talked about, and you may remember, those of you who know what happened in 1823, Andrew Henry abandoned Fort Henry at the mouth of the Yellowstone and went down the Yellowstone River. And when they reached the Powder, there were a number of obstacles, rapids, and so they buried a lot of their equipment and their goods. And Bridger tells them now in 1856 that these were known as Henry's Caches. And the name Henry's Caches actually came into the literature, and it's both in the report by Ferdinand Hayden, and it's in a report by a later person, William Reynolds. And right where their arrow is here, I think it's camp number 28, the narrative says, they describe about Henry's Caches and how he built these here. So, you know, Henry had been up here and he was going back down towards the Bighorn River, built the caches here, and they were stolen. So that was a little bit of what was happening there. This is the picture I was telling you about It's the same pose. The head is tilted the same way, hands are the same way, the belt's the same. All of this is here. But you see the corduroy here in the pants. And you see some fabric, corduroy maybe here too. And you see some more decoration here. What happened is William Henry Jackson took the original painting that I showed you before, or photograph, and did a half image of it, only halfway there. And then he created a charcoal sketch and added background to the wall, a little bit more figure to his face. And so it's really the same image, but this was doctored up. The other unusual thing is Jackson, who was a famous photographer and a very good artist as well, he said he went to see Jim Bridger and painted his picture there. Now, he might have done that, but when you look at the two images, this is not a new painting at all. It's just an overlay of an existing photograph. So I'm not saying that Jackson was wrong. Maybe he actually did go there, but he decided to use the original image. And a picture of that right now is in the collection here at the museum. So it's just interesting. So Reynolds wanted to go all over the place, but I'm coming almost to question time. So I'll just go to the very last one. Berthoud, whose Berthoud Pass is named after, the folks in Denver, they wanted to have a part of the overland route. And this is 1861. And the states are starting to secede from the Union. And so where the path had been through what became Southern Territory, they needed a path through Northern Territory. And they wanted to connect also with Denver and Salt Lake City. So they hired Bridger to come out. So Bridger came out and did some exploration. And Berthoud was the one who actually found Berthoud Pass. But then when they found that they could maybe go all the way to Salt Lake, so Jim Bridger and a mountaineer named Tim Goodale, it was called the Denver, Golden City, and Great Salt Lake Wagon Road. It was a fairly good road, except it was very hard to get through Berthoud Pass through the wintertime, and so it never really succeeded. So there's a very kind of brief introduction of some very significant exploration activities that were important to the nation, and the challenges that the mountaineers, mountain men, felt when they found that people were not listening to what they were saying, and they were disregarding the value of what these mountain men knew about. So I'll take any questions if you have any. Yes. I think they just abandoned it in the snow, so it probably was never recovered, I would think.
So I'm going to have everybody speak into the mic when you ask your question so the live stream crowd can hear it. But he was just asking where the howitzer was. So that was Jerry's answer. Did you have more?
Do you agree that Fremont was childish and foolish after you've done all this research on him?
Do I agree that he was foolish?
Childish and foolish.
Oh, yes. Childish, foolish, vain, aggressive, very opportunistic, but also very energetic. Became the first candidate for the Republican Party in the United States for president. So he was a very significant figure, but he was so focused on his own reputation that he put his men at peril several times.
Old Bill Williams, how old was he when he was guiding Fremont?
Let's see. I have him when he was an old man. Old Bill. Well, he was always called Old Bill Williams anyway. But he died shortly after that. I mean, he went to actually retrieve some material and died. I would say he's in his 60s, and he had a drinking problem. He needed the money. Dick Wooten had gone and went out and said, no, we're not going to. This is way too. We had early snow, and this is way too deep. Williams said, we'll try, but it's going to be hard. And then they had this difference of opinion of which way to go. Fremont said, we're going this way, and then people started dying.
Was that Joseph Walker on one of those expeditions, the one that had Walker's Pass in Nevada?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, it was Joseph Walker. I mean, the ones that I chronicled, Carson was on 4 of these expeditions as a guide. Bridger was on 4. Walker was on 3. Those 3 were superlative guides. Actually, they were all very good guides, and some of their leaders were not as good. But nevertheless, it shows that the mountaineers that we've been studying from 1822 to 1840, they had another life where they continued to provide their knowledge and their expertise as a service to the nation. And so it just expands our knowledge of what these great mountain men did. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry. We're going to switch gears here, and Jim Auld will be setting up for his talk, and we'll start that in just a moment. His talk concerns a very valuable and rare relic of the fur trade that was passed down through Jedediah Smith's family, and the story of that item. Jim Auld is an author and historian and frequent contributor to the Rocky Mountain Fur Trade Journal. He has a special interest in and extensive knowledge about Jedediah Smith. In Jim's article, Jedediah Smith's Twice Stolen Pistol, he traces the story of this rare relic across the years, from Jedediah Smith's death on the plains of Kansas to the Southern California Museum where it was put on display.
Welcome. Thanks for coming on this hot afternoon. I want to let you know I'm going to read my paper just so we stay on point here and on time, but I'll also be engaging with you later when we have some questions. This image is, in fact, the lost pistol of Jedediah Smith. It's first mentioned in a letter written by his brother, Austin Smith, to his other brother, Ira Smith, who was living in St. Louis at the time. And Austin wrote to Ira that he wrote on September 24th, 1831, informing him that their brother Jedediah had been killed south of the Santa Fe Trail in May of that year. And he added to his letter, "I have his gun and pistols." So this is the first reference, written reference, to this particular pistol. And I want to say right off that contrary to the many opinions and undocumented citations, there's nothing credible that's been found to support any reference to this pistol ever being mentioned before this date, this letter that was written in September 24th of 1831. It is not known when or where Jedediah Smith obtained this pistol, nor how he obtained it, who made it, or whether it was part of a pair of pistols or a single firearm. Regardless, this singular artifact has an interesting story to tell. And that story was made possible by the people who possessed the pistol and passed it down through the succeeding generations of Jedediah's family. I will tell you more of that story in a few minutes, but first, let me share with you the identity of a contemporary historian who was a central figure in the research and actions needed to preserve this amazing story. This person that I'm going to mention is absolutely responsible for a great deal of the facts, names, and dates that go along with this article. I would not have been able to write it without the efforts of a friend named Troy Tuggle. Here's Troy Tuggle, Jim Hardy, and myself. Jim Hardy and I were both good friends of Troy Tuggle's. I met Troy around 1988 when I attended my first gathering of the Jedediah Smith Society in Stockton, California, on the campus of the University of the Pacific. Troy was one of those people who seemed to be smiling all the time. Troy was happy. I'll never forget how congenial he was. And he had been, among other things, a history teacher, a fur trade historian, a researcher, and an author. And he supported my interest in Jedediah Smith way back then. In 1971, Troy approached the last remaining member of this particular family that had collected so much about their famous uncle. And you may not know that Jedediah Smith did not have any offspring, but he had many siblings. And this person that Troy approached was named Julian Smith Bacon. We okay, Clint? Went by the family name of Smitty. More about Smitty in a few minutes later also. So by the early 1970s, Smitty was faced with this daunting task of going through his family's heirlooms and treasures. He had the garage full of personal property that dated back to the 1830s. Into this unique situation stepped Troy Tuggle, who had been researching the life of Smith and the lost pistol for several years. Over a 7-year period, Troy assisted with the historical context of the collection, while Smitty shared the narratives he had heard about his famous family since his youth. Tuggle wrote that Smitty would share family histories, bringing out bundles of letters and old photographs held together with string and brittle rubber bands. Together, Smitty and Troy pieced together the story of a family and its famous ancestor into the account of the lost pistol. Troy Tuggle was my mentor, and this is a typical photo of Jim Hardy and I with our friend. Whenever Jim and I would encounter Troy at a conference, we would break into a grin, and we never stopped smiling the whole time we were with him. Sadly, 2 weeks ago, we received news that Troy had died in May of this year. So this article and this presentation are dedicated to Troy Tuggle and Smitty Bacon for their determined preservation of this historic collection. Now back to the pistol. This is the best, most detailed photograph available of this iconic firearm. It was photographed in the early 1920s, and oddly enough, no other images of this quality are known to exist. It is a muzzle-loading percussion pistol, 15.5 inches long with a 9.5-inch steel barrel. It's a .50 caliber using a metal ball or a bullet, approximately 1/2 inch in diameter. Neither the name of the maker or the date of its manufacture is known at this time. It has 4 visible vertical scratches on the right side of the wooden stock. You can see it at about the middle of the wooden part. It also has what are called small granulations affixed to the top of the hammer, which are tiny little dots, part of the metallurgy process to enable the thumb to have some friction. If someone were to come forward claiming that they have this Jed Smith pistol, it would be quite easy to authenticate their claim. The wood grain on the handle would be a distinguishing characteristic in itself. Maybe you're wondering why this pistol is so important. Let's go back a few decades to 1831. Jedediah Smith was part of a caravan that had left St. Louis around April 1st, 1831, at the end of his career as a mountain man. The caravan included at least 22 wagons and probably 84 men. 2 weeks later, they were at Independence, Missouri, up there in the upper right-hand corner of the map. And the troubles were starting to show up by the time they had crossed Missouri. The animals' gear, the harnesses, were wearing out before they really should have. Possibly, in the opinion of some, because of the low level of experience shown by the mule skinners that were in charge of the horses, mules, and oxen. Nevertheless, the caravan continued and began their journey on the Santa Fe Trail. After traveling over 300 miles, they arrived at the Arkansas River, which is right about in the center of the map where it says Fort Dodge or the Caches. There, the trail turned southwest towards Santa Fe, which was another 400 miles away. Up to this point, there had not been any serious disasters, except for the death of one person of the party who had dropped behind the main group and was killed. But after fording the low water of the Arkansas River in present-day Kansas, they entered the Mexican territory and encountered their first real obstacle. On May 27th, 1831, the party suffered extremely from a hot, burning south wind. This cannot be underestimated and seems to me a very significant event. The whole caravan was desperately thirsty, and 3 days after crossing the low water of the Arkansas River, this caravan was in deep trouble. This was a region of the West Jedediah Smith had never been to before, and one from which he would never return. The very brief version of Jedediah Smith's death is this. He left the caravan on May 27th, headed south looking for water. Others in the party went in different directions. They came back after finding water, but Jedediah did not return. The caravan continued traveling and found enough water to eventually make it to Santa Fe, the lower left-hand corner, by July 4th. They had with them 32 chests and 16 trunks, all packed into their wagons, with a myriad of merchandise suitable for trade with the Mexicans of Santa Fe. Among the contents, there were 20 bolts of linen, each containing 625 yards of fabric in each container. They had assorted tools and saws, chisels, brass nails, and even several dozen panes of window glass. In the letter written by Austin to his brother Ira, the account of finding the pistol is brief, and in my opinion, slightly suspect, owing to the lack of any kind of back and forth interrogation by Ira and the language barrier. Neither of the brothers spoke Spanish. Austin writes that he and his brother Peter Smith, who was also with the caravan, were told by some Spanish traders in Santa Fe that Jedediah had found water and was then surprised by assailants who overwhelmed and killed him. In the course of this conversation, the two brothers recognized Jedediah's gun and pistol. At this time, it seemed clear to the brothers that Jedediah had been killed. The items recovered from the Spanish traders are thought to be at least one pistol and 2 holsters. By the time Austin Smith returned to the settlements near St. Louis later in that year, this group included a mahogany shaving cabinet with a mirror. I call this picture the trifecta of the Jedediah Smith collection that remains today. We have the shaving case that he may not have ever used on this trip, but he brought it along with him, apparently in one of the wagons. At least one pistol made it back to the settlements, and a very unique pair of pommel holsters made out of very thick leather. Any other artifacts that existed after Jedediah's death had either been previously given away in Santa Fe, or they were anonymously lost or acquired later by someone else. Austin Smith died in 1833, and the objects that he had at the time that were uninventoried, unfortunately, were passed on to his younger brother, Peter, for safekeeping. This is the beginning of the Peter Smith family having possession of these objects and passing them on to their descendants. This is an undated photograph of Peter Smith. Peter was 11 years younger than Jedediah. And Evelyn Smith was Peter Smith's youngest daughter and a niece to Jedediah Smith, who of course she never met. She was born in 1857. This photograph was likely taken around 1875. In 1880, Evelyn married Walter Romaine Bacon, who's a key figure in this story. A few years after their marriage, Evelyn and Walter moved from Nebraska to Los Angeles, where Walter soon became a successful lawyer. Evelyn's mother, Juline Smith, who was Peter's widow, joined her daughter and son-in-law a few years later in Los Angeles, and she brought with her the historical objects associated with Jedediah Smith with her. Juline died in 1893. Evelyn and Walter Bacon displayed the pistol, holsters, and shaving stand on numerous occasions, both publicly and privately in their home. They became the primary boosters of this story that was associated with their famous forebear. In 1896, historian J.M. Gwynn presented a paper to the Historical Society of Southern California titled Captain Jedediah S. Smith, the Pathfinder of the Sierras. And Gwynn credited Walter Bacon for providing information about Smith's death on the Cimarron. Gwynn stated that the pistols and holsters are now in the possession of Mrs. W.R. Bacon, that would be Evelyn, and that it is a single-barreled pistol of large caliber. This is the earliest printed description of the pistol with any detail, and it matches the pistol that was soon to be displayed as Jedediah Smith's pistol. Several events stand out during the next 45 years that indicate the growing awareness of Californians and the image of Jedediah Smith as a local as well as a national hero. There was a centennial celebration of Smith's entrance into California in 1926. The public was made aware of the travels and accomplishments of Jedediah Smith for the first time through media coverage and professionally produced remembrances. Daily newspapers dominated the news business during these times, and I found an abundance of articles to inform the public about this new hero and what he meant to California. Here are three examples. On the left is an article about Judge Walter Bacon revealing the discovery of Harrison Rogers' diary that had been found at the public library in St. Louis, Missouri. Harrison Rogers was Jedediah Smith's second in command on one of his expeditions, and he was one of the men killed near the Umpqua River in Oregon on July 14, 1828. Harrison Rogers' diary revealed information not previously known about the Smith expeditions. On the right is an article summarizing the travels of Smith and his entrance into California on November 27, 1826. In the center, and I love this picture, a rendering from the September 12, 1932 edition of the Rocky Mountain News. This is an excellent example of what I call the unrestrained hyperbole frequently found in accounts of Jedediah Smith's personality, travels, legacy, and death. I wonder why the horse didn't notice that there was somebody behind Jedediah with a spear. Other Smith-related celebrations that occurred in Los Angeles during this period include a pageant in his honor with a cast and choruses and scenery changes and dialogue presented at the Carthay Circle Center in Los Angeles in its first year of operation. Perhaps the most eccentric tribute to Smith's entrance into Los Angeles celebrated his descent from the Mojave Desert across Cajon Pass in 1824. Well, they brought the rock down in 1824. This was observed by moving a 15-ton boulder from Cajon Pass down to Wilshire Boulevard, where it stands today. And that's my old friend, Troy Tuggle, standing next to the Cajon boulder. You can go see it today. It kind of looks like a dinosaur egg, or a big dinosaur egg. In the fall of 1937, some of Smith's belongings were displayed in the library of Belmont High School in Los Angeles. Evelyn Smith Bacon's grandson, Smitty, a junior at Belmont High School, shown there, arranged the exhibit. The display presumably included the pistol, the holsters, and the shaving case. And I'll just show you that picture one more time. This is what the people saw when they went to the library in the high school. One person even reported that there were two pistols there, and there's some thought that maybe they saw the reflection of one in the mirror and didn't pay a lot of attention and thought that there were two. While looking for a photo of Smitty Bacon in the Belmont High School yearbook, it was discovered that the class president of Belmont High School that year was someone who went on to a very remarkable, successful career. Please raise your hand if you know who this is. Oop. Oop. Here we go. Anyone know who this is? You will after you hear this.
Sorry, you're about to see it through. The next
I looked for hours to see if there was a Dragnet episode about a theft of a pistol from a museum, but I couldn't find any. His name is Jack Webb. So from this point on, our story takes a dark turn. After the display of the Smith artifacts at the Belmont High School Library. In my journal article, I call this the Smith family quarrel. This account is pieced together by Troy Tuggle and Smitty Bacon during the 1970s, and certainly leaves some important questions unanswered. In the first part of the 20th century, two branches of the Peter Smith family descendants were living in Los Angeles. I briefly told you about the side of the family descended from Peter Smith's family and his daughter Evelyn. Her and her husband Walter Bacon seem to have taken care of their aging mother, Juline Smith, Peter's widow, and the Jedediah collection of artifacts that after they all relocated from Nebraska to California. Not much is known about Juline and Peter's eldest daughter, Sarah, who was 15 years older than Evelyn. One of Sarah's daughters was named Ida Heffelman, who married a gentleman named Leroy Wright. In the spring of 1938, and there's a picture of Leroy Wright in the journal article. In the spring of 1938, Leroy Wright approached the Bacon men, which would be Smitty and his father, Julian Bacon Smith, with a Julian Smith Bacon, with a proposal to borrow the Smith pistol and holsters to exhibit at the Junipero Serra Museum in San Diego. Leroy Wright was president of the San Diego Historical Society. Believing that this arrangement was a loan, Julian Bacon agreed. Whether through misunderstanding or misrepresentation, the pistol stayed at the museum, much to the surprise of the Bacon family. By July of 1938, the museum announced that a pistol and two holsters of Jedediah Smith's had been acquired for the museum's collection. They were subsequently displayed in a pioneer room in glass cases where thousands of people contemplated their historical significance, along with dozens of other old firearms in the museum's collection. They remained there for 23 years. These are some rare vintage photographs from the 1950s, generously shared with me by the San Diego Historical Society, showing the pioneer room where the pistol and holster were kept. Notice in the photo on the left, there are two holsters down low in the case. These are the two holsters that have been claimed to be in Santa Fe over 110 years later and borrowed by Leroy Wright. Here is a recent photo of the pistols just taken within the last 10 years. They're exceptionally large compared to most pistols you would expect. They're made of very thick leather And when they're sewn together, they are intended to be laid over the pommel of a saddle. Here is a rare composite image of the pistol showing both sides with the hammer in the cocked position. There's no other photographs of this pistol that show it like this. There are 3 errors in this small piece of paper attached to this pistol. It reads, "This pistol and 2 holsters were carried by Jedediah Smith, the first American to cross the continent into California in 1827." When actually, they probably were not brought to California by Smith. They misspelled Jedediah's name, and his first visit was in 1826, not 1827. So just that one little tag, there's 3 errors. On the night of October 25th, 1961, the Pioneer Room at the Junipero Serra Museum was burglarized, and the Jedediah Smith pistol was stolen, along with a portion of other firearms on display there. This photo was taken from the top of the stairs that led down into the Pioneer Room, which is not a very big room at all. The San Diego Police Department burglary report states that the robbers broke the glass on the large horizontal case opposite the entrance of the room and took the Smith pistol. I'm pretty convinced that the pistol was right in that case right there. And I wish there was a close-up of that case. And maybe we'll find one. But I'm looking for one that shows the pistol in the museum. This wanted poster was created by Troy Tuggle in 1976 to generate interest in the lost pistol. The Jedediah Smith Society offered a $250 reward for its return, which figures out to about $1,284 today. And here's a photo of Smitty Bacon, taken by Troy Tuggle after one of their meetings that they would have at Smitty's house down in San Diego. He died in 2001. And here's my final tribute slide to Troy Tuggle. He was a veteran of the Korean War, a teacher for many years in California at various schools. He was an historian, and I call him a negotiator for being able to get all these goods from Smitty and deliver them to the Jedediah Smith Society. If he hadn't done that, we wouldn't have known any of this. And he was my mentor. So this last slide is that poster over there, blown up a few times. It's designed as a contemporary version of Troy's wanted poster. Maybe it will help locate this valuable artifact of the Rocky Mountain fur trade. I want to thank Scott Walker and the editorial board for their patience and understanding as we work through this production of the article. Thank you very much.
Collectors of firearms are looking on the internet
That's
all
great.
the time.
That's,
Is this reward poster or any information on the internet?
if you take a picture of that poster and send it to all your friends, it might
So
be.
no, okay. That's how you're going to find it. It's out there.
That's why I wrote this article, and that's why I'm making all this information as easy to access as possible. Anybody that knows a gun dealer or a gun collector or somebody that has old guns in their house, send them this. We'll be able to know right away. Look at the wood grain. Can't fake it.
We're
Right.
really, really hoping that someone will see the article and say, I don't need to read that article. I got one in my drawer.
Yes, Clay.
Jim, was there any determination by anybody that actually handled this pistol when it was available, that whether it was a flintlock originally and converted to percussion, any information in that? Because I'm real curious about a 1831 pistol that started out percussion.
Right. All of the documentation that I could find from various experts that had the pistol available to look at it, they all say that it was not converted.
Well, based on that plate, that's, I would say I'd agree with that because it doesn't show like it ever was a flintlock. So
That's
real interesting aspect.
That's what I understand about it. Yeah.
Clay, the one thing that I think that might argue with that is the full cock position in that other photo is extremely far back for a percussion pistol. But that doesn't necessarily mean it was ever a flintlock. It just means that the tumbler was cut that way.
Right. And I should say, I'm not a gun collector at all. That's why Scott wrote a wonderful appendix to my article. Yes.
There is a pistol in the museum in Cody that is tagged Jedediah Smith's pistol. It's a caplock that's been changed back to a flintlock. Have you any thoughts on that one?
I've read the article by Jim Hardy, who analyzed the pistol, looked at it, looked at the survey that was done, and it's one of those things where he can't say it wasn't owned by Jed Smith, but it's certainly not the pistol that they claimed in Santa Fe. And he probably had lots of pistols. He had lots of weapons, I'm sure. Some of them might have been in the wagon on the way to Santa Fe. Some of them might have been left in St. Louis. So there's just so much we don't know. And as many of you know, a lot of Jedediah Smith's personal effects were lost in fires, at least 3 fires in the United States after he died, even while he was alive. So we have a very incomplete jigsaw puzzle here when it comes to Jed Smith and what he had with him. Any other?
Yeah, on the pistol, do they have any idea of the materials? What type of wood is it? How big was the caliber? Do they have any information on the size of the caliber? Or
well, the
stock?
barrel is steel. I think the
Yeah.
wood is maple,
Is it?
perhaps. Someone might have said
There's
that.
nothing.
handled
There's
it.
nothing sure about that. And what caliber is it anyway?
50 caliber.
50.
What we know about the pistol is based on the photograph that you see, so you all know as much as we do. And then the other thing is, when the museum accessioned it, they made a few notes, but they obviously weren't gun people. They
Right.
said that the bore was approximately 1/2 inch. They measured the full length, and we're assuming that that is, if you look at this poster after we finish, this is the full length. And if you've ever handled a Lyman Great Plains pistol, that's approximately the same size. And beyond that, what you see is what we know. It's so frustrating to read over the accession information and have all the questions you wish they'd answered, but that's not particular to the museum in San Diego. Everyone does that. 100 years from now, people will be saying, why didn't they ask this question about our articles? And as far as the pistol in Cody, the thing that ties it to Jedediah Smith is is exclusively an engraving in the butt cap of the pistol that says Jedediah Strong Smith. But they haven't been able to yet find the provenance that ties it with any kind of a paper trail to Smith. So hopefully they'll find that, because it's very possible Smith owned several pistols over his lifetime and during his explorations. So we're certainly not saying that that's not one of Smith's pistols. It's just that this one has a longer paper trail.
Right. And some gun people, one gun person told me if they had this gun in their hand, they would be able to take it apart. And it may be that the maker's mark is hidden by the wood stock, which is not uncommon. So we just need to get this pistol in our hands, and then we'll know a lot more.
Is there documentation that Indians killed Smith, or was he killed by Mexicans?
The story is very murky because, I mean, one of the kind of classic story is that Smith went out, was killed by Comanche Indians, who then couldn't figure out this percussion cap pistol, so they gave or sold the pistol to the Spanish traders, who traveled 400 miles to Santa Fe and happened to be there the day that the brothers showed up and sold it back to them or gave it to them. There was no interviews, there was no dateline about this event. So I'm not willing to say that Indians killed him, but probably. I don't know which tribe. I think he probably did find water because the rest of his group did find water. So it's likely that Smith found water and then got killed after. And in my article, I try to be very vague about which tribe killed him, because I don't think it's accurate for me to say who it was. But yeah, I would agree that it's likely. Yes.
On that same note, did anybody ever find his body?
Well, there was no reference at all at the time of when Jed vanished about where his body was. Years later, Peter Smith, who was there in Santa Fe when they found the pistols, his wife told Walter Bacon, oh yes, Peter went back to the site, recovered Jedediah's body, and took it back to Santa Fe and buried it. Now that's a 400-mile trip times 2 with a body that's probably been dead for months. I don't buy it, and I don't know why Julene would have said that. So no, I don't think anyone ever found the body. The wolves. The lost body of Jedediah Smith. That could be the next thing we talk about. Any other questions? Well, thanks a lot.
We're going to take a break for how many hours? When are we out by? 3 o'clock will be our next presentations. Please come on back. You can check the schedule on the kiosk out front of the museum.